The cameras were barely rolling when Atlanta lit up with a headline no one saw coming. After years of silence, shade and whispered grudges, K. Michelle has stepped back into the spotlight, and she did it in a way that left fans gasping for air. The R&B powerhouse, known for her fiery personality and unforgettable voice, shocked the entire love and hip-hop universe by making a surprise appearance at Rasheeda's latest grand opening event. For a pair whose history has been defined by scathing interviews, icy side-eyes, and social media jabs that kept gossip blogs busy for years, this was the reunion nobody dared predict. Yet there they were, face to face, with cameras capturing every flicker of tension. Emotions ran high as the crowd froze, unsure if they were about to witness a tearful apology or a public showdown. Gasps rippled through the room when Rasheeda took a step forward, breaking the silence with a warm smile that fans described as almost unreal. Could this really be happening? For years, their feud fueled some of the most dramatic episodes in reality TV history. But tonight the air crackled with something entirely different, an energy that mixed shock, curiosity, and a hint of hope. People clutched their phones, recording every second as whispers spread like wildfire across social media. "This can't be real," one fan tweeted. "I need to see every angle of this moment." Whether this was the start of an epic reconciliation or the calm before another storm, one thing was certain. K. Michelle's return and Rasheeda's unexpected welcome have melted the internet and reignited a saga that millions thought was over for good. Under the glow of soft stage lights and the buzz of 100 whispered conversations, the energy inside Rasheeda's boutique felt charged, almost electric, as if the walls themselves knew something unforgettable was about to unfold. The DJ tried to keep the mood light with a steady flow of music, but every beat seemed to echo the tension in the air. Rasheeda stood near a display of glittering accessories, her smile sharp and polished for the cameras. But her eyes flicked to the entrance every few seconds, betraying a restless anticipation. It had been years since she last saw K. Michelle in person, years of public feuds, interviews laced with shade, and fans taking sides like it was a championship game. When word leaked earlier in the day that a special guest was expected, the whispers began to churn through Atlanta like wildfire, but no one dared to believe it could be her. Then the doors opened, and the boutique fell into a collective gasp as K. Michelle walked in, draped in a floor-length ivory coat that shimmered with each slow, deliberate step. Phones shot up like a forest of glowing screens, recording the moment for every corner of the internet. Kay paused just inside, eyes sweeping the room as though weighing every familiar face, every memory of late-night arguments and cutting remarks. Her presence was magnetic, pulling all attention toward her without a single word. Rasheeda's hand tightened on her champagne glass, the liquid trembling slightly, but she didn't look away. For years they had traded accusations, from broken business deals to personal betrayals, each interview another layer of bitterness. Now, standing just a few feet apart, all of it seemed to hover between them like a storm cloud waiting to break. "Well," Kay said finally, her voice low but carrying across the stunned crowd, "this is unexpected." A murmur of nervous laughter rippled through the room, but Rasheeda only tilted her head, her own voice steady. "Atlanta's full of surprises," she replied, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. The crowd pressed closer, eager to catch every word. Fans were already live streaming, hearts and shocked emojis flooding comment sections as viewers speculated on whether they were about to witness a public truce or the start of another legendary showdown. Kay moved forward, each step deliberate, the ivory coat parting to reveal a sleek black jumpsuit that shimmered under the lights. "I didn't come here for drama," she said, though her tone carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken grievances. "I came to see if time really does change things." Rasheeda met her gaze, her own history flashing behind her eyes. Late-night phone calls, old alliances, the sting of words said in anger. "Time changes everything," she said softly, though there was a challenge buried in her voice. The boutique seemed to hold its breath as the two women stood face to face, the silence between them thick with years of tension and regret. Cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of emotion, from the slight tremble in Kay's jaw to the way Rasheeda's fingers tapped lightly against her glass. Friends and fellow cast members hovered at the edges, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. Kirk stood a few feet back, his expression unreadable, while Sierra whispered urgently to Carly Red, who clutched her phone like a lifeline. Outside, word of Kay's arrival spread across social media faster than the boutique could hold its guests. Twitter threads exploded with speculation. "Is this real life?" One fan wrote, "We're about to witness history." Inside, Kay finally broke the silence again, her voice a mix of hesitation and determination. "You know, Rasheeda, I thought about this night 100 times. What I'd say if I ever stood in front of you again. I thought about yelling. I thought about walking away. But none of that felt right anymore. Rasheeda's eyes softened just slightly, though she kept her chin high. So what does feel right? She asked. Kay took a slow breath, glancing briefly at the crowd before returning her gaze to Rasheeda. Being here, she said simply. Facing it? Facing you. A collective shiver passed through the room as the weight of those words settled. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, a crack in the armor. A signal that years of animosity might finally be giving way to something else. Rasheeda set her glass down on the nearest table, the soft clink of crystal against wood ringing louder than any shout. She stepped closer, closing the final inches between them. You showing up, she said quietly. That says more than any apology ever could. The crowd erupted into a mix of applause and gasps, the sound swelling like a wave of relief and disbelief. Carly covered her mouth, eyes wide, while Sierra blinked back tears she hadn't expected to shed. Even Kirk allowed a faint smile to break through his guarded expression. Kay nodded slowly, her eyes glistening as she fought to keep her composure. I didn't know if you'd even let me in, she admitted. Rasheeda allowed herself a small, genuine smile. I almost didn't, she confessed, earning a ripple of laughter from those closest to the conversation. But here we are. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment as if the world might need proof that it truly happened. The tension that once defined their relationship seemed to loosen, if only slightly, replaced by a fragile but undeniable sense of possibility. Fans watching the livestream flooded the comments with heart emojis and shocked reactions, declaring the reunion the comeback of the year. Outside the boutique, reporters and curious onlookers gathered, eager to catch a glimpse of the two women whose rivalry had fueled countless headlines. Inside, Kay and Rasheeda continued their quiet exchange, their words lost to the music as the DJ raised the volume to fill the space with a hopeful rhythm. The night was far from over, but in that moment, something shifted, a fragile truce, a spark of something that felt dangerously close to forgiveness. The music throbbed low and steady as the boutique settled into a tense but mesmerizing rhythm, the kind of atmosphere where every breath felt heavier than the last. Fans pressed against the velvet ropes outside, phones glowing in the dark as they tried to capture even a glimpse of what was unfolding inside. Inside the glass doors, Kay, Michelle and Rasheeda stood shoulder to shoulder near the center of the room, their silhouettes framed by the boutique's glittering displays. For a brief second, it looked as if the years of venomous interviews and backstage whispers had evaporated. But the air still carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Carly Red slid closer, her wide eyes darting between the two women like a referee in a silent standoff. This is wild, she whispered to Sierra, her voice barely audible over the bass. I can't believe she actually came. Sierra bit her lip and shook her head slowly. Girl, this is either the start of a miracle or the biggest mess Atlanta's ever seen. Their words hung in the air like a dare. Fans inside the boutique leaned in, waiting for the next crackle of drama to ignite. Kay glanced around the room, her gaze landing briefly on familiar faces, old friends, former allies, even a few quiet enemies disguised behind polite smiles. Each one held a piece of the story, fragments of late-night phone calls and public accusations that had once defined her life. I almost turned around, she admitted suddenly, her voice cutting through the music with startling clarity. Walking back in here, it felt impossible. Rasheeda tilted her head, her eyes searching Kay's face for any sign of the fire that once burned so bright. But you didn't, she said, her tone careful, as though one wrong word could shatter the fragile calm. You walked through that door. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back shouted, "That's growth," and a burst of nervous laughter followed. Kay allowed a faint smile, but it faded as quickly as it appeared. Growth, she echoed, almost to herself. Funny how it hurts before it heals. Rasheeda nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth tightening as memories flickered across her face. There had been nights when each of them had sworn they'd never speak again. Moments when betrayal felt deeper than friendship ever had. You're not wrong, she said softly. It does hurt. The room seemed to lean forward as Kay took another small step closer. I'm not here to rewrite the past, she continued. We said things. We did things. But I don't want to carry that weight anymore. The words struck like a spark in dry wood. Carly clapped a hand over her mouth. Sierra blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was hearing. Even Kirk, usually unreadable, shifted forward as if the floor itself had tilted. Rasheeda drew a steady breath, the slightest tremor betraying the storm beneath her calm exterior. Neither do I, she admitted. But letting it go, that's not as simple as a few words. The crowd hushed again as Kay nodded, her eyes locking with Rasheeda's. Then let's not make it simple, she said. Let's make it real. The boutique seemed to exhale with a collective gasp, a sound that bled into the rising chatter of fans outside. Twitter feeds lit up with frantic updates. They're talking forgiveness, one user posted, while another countered, this is just the calm before the next explosion, mark my words. Before Rasheeda could respond, the boutique doors burst open and a familiar figure strode in, sending another jolt of electricity through the crowd. It was Mimi Faust. Her arrival as unplanned as it was dramatic. Dressed in a sleek burgundy jumpsuit and carrying the kind of confidence that turned heads on impact. Mimi cut straight through the crowd, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Well, well, she said loudly, her voice slicing through the low hum of music. Look at this reunion. Conversations froze mid. Fans whipped their phones around to capture every second as Mimi stopped just a few feet from the pair. Am I late to the peace treaty? She asked. Or did I just walk into the biggest plot twist of the year? Rasheeda forced a small laugh, though the tension in her shoulders betrayed her nerves. We're talking, she said carefully. Mimi arched a brow, her gaze flicking between the two women. Talking, she repeated. That's new. Kay folded her arms, her expression unreadable. You got something to say, Mimi? Mimi tilted her head, her smirk sharpening. Only that Atlanta hasn't seen this much fake love since last season's reunion. Gasps shot through the crowd as fans scrambled to capture the moment. Carly whispered a frantic, Lord, here we go, to Sierra, who clutched her phone tighter, ready to film whatever came next. Kay's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. Nobody invited you to weigh in, she said evenly. Mimi shrugged, unfazed. Nobody has to invite me. Drama sends an open invitation. Rasheeda stepped forward, her voice firm. Not tonight, she said. Not when we're finally trying to fix something that's been broken for too long. The room fell silent again, the sharp edges of Mimi's arrival blunted by Rasheeda's steady resolve. Fans online exploded with reactions, Rasheeda shutting it down. One tweet read, while another warned, Mimi's about to stir the pot. Watch. Mimi held Rasheeda's gaze for a long moment before finally backing down with a small, reluctant nod. Fine, she said, her voice softening just enough to keep the tension alive. But don't think for a second everyone's ready to forget what went down. Kay exhaled slowly, the tightness in her shoulders easing just slightly. Nobody's forgetting, she said quietly. We're just done letting it own us. The DJ shifted to a slower track, the beat wrapping the room in a warm, unexpected calm. Rasheeda reached for a fresh glass of champagne and handed it to Kay. The gesture simple but heavy with meaning. Kay accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly, a moment so small, yet powerful enough to send the crowd into another frenzy of whispers and camera flashes. To tonight, Rasheeda said softly. Kay met her gaze, a small smile tugging at her lips. To tonight, she echoed. The boutique erupted in cheers, the sound spilling out into the street, where fans screamed and strangers craned their necks to see what history looked like in real time. Inside, the night was far from over, but for the first time in years, it felt like something new was finally beginning. Outside the boutique, the street had turned into a flashing sea of headlights and camera phones as word of the night's shocking reunion traveled across Atlanta in real time. Cars slowed to a crawl, while fans shouted updates to friends on speakerphone, their voices breaking with disbelief. Inside, the boutique pulsed with a strange new rhythm, a fragile mix of celebration and caution. The scent of perfume and champagne hung heavy in the air as the DJ kept the music low. A steady heartbeat beneath the swirl of murmurs and nervous laughter. Rasheeda and K. Michelle stood at the center like twin magnets, drawing every glance, every breath, every ounce of attention. While Carly Red hovered a few feet away, whispering furiously into her phone. Girl, you're missing history, she hissed. This isn't just a reunion, it's a full-blown resurrection. Kay adjusted the sleeve of her ivory coat, the movement small but deliberate, a subtle shield against the hundreds of eyes locked on her. It still feels unreal, she admitted quietly, almost to herself, though Rasheeda heard every word. Walking back into this room, I thought I'd feel powerful, but all I feel is exposed. Rasheeda nodded, her gaze softening as she leaned closer. That's because this is real, she said. No cameras, no editing, just us. Their words carried through the boutique, like the first drops of rain before a storm, soft yet impossible to ignore. Before Kay could respond, the door swung open again with a sharp metallic click, and another unexpected figure stepped inside. Erica Dixon entered like a spark thrown onto dry kindling, her black leather jacket gleaming under the boutique lights. Conversations stuttered into silence as she scanned the room, her sharp eyes locking instantly on K. Michelle. Well, If this isn't the night Atlanta decided to rewrite reality, she said with a sly smile. Her voice carrying over the music, fans gasped and phones shot up again, eager to capture the next unpredictable twist. Rasheeda straightened, her smile tightening. "Erica," she greeted, her tone careful. "Didn't expect to see you tonight?" Erica stepped closer, her boots clicking against the polished floor. "I wasn't planning on it," she replied. "But when I heard Kay was back in town, I figured something worth watching might finally happen." Her words sliced through the warm air, drawing a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Carly whispered, "Oh, this is about to get messy," while Sierra clutched her phone so hard her knuckles whitened. Kay held Erica's gaze, her expression unreadable. "You always did love a spectacle," she said evenly. Erica tilted her head, her smirk never wavering. "And you always gave me one?" The tension spiked like a sudden surge of electricity, the room bracing for an explosion. Rasheeda quickly stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "Not tonight," she said. "We're trying to move forward." Erica raised an eyebrow. "Forward," she repeated. "After everything that went down, you think a few kind words are enough to bury years of chaos?" The crowd buzzed as fans whispered theories. Old wounds were being dragged back into the light, names and moments from past seasons flickering through every mind in the room. Kay drew a slow breath, her voice low but steady. "It's not about burying anything," she said. "It's about owning it and choosing not to let it control us anymore." For the first time, Erica's confident smirk faltered, her eyes narrowing in thought. "That sounds nice," she said cautiously, "but words are cheap. Actions are everything." Rasheeda seized the moment, stepping forward until she stood between both women, her presence commanding. "Then let's show the action tonight," she said. "Let's stop letting the past define every room we walk into." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing off the boutique walls. Even Erica, after a long pause, gave a reluctant nod. "All right," she said, her tone still edged with skepticism. "But I'm watching." As the tension eased, the DJ shifted into a slow, sultry beat that seemed to wrap the room in a tentative peace. Fans outside cheered when the music drifted through the open doors, their chants rising like a chorus. ATL history. ATL history. Inside, Carly leaned toward Sierra, her eyes wide with excitement. "Can you believe this?" she whispered. "This is bigger than any reunion special they've ever filmed." Sierra nodded breathlessly. "This is going to break the internet by morning." Kay glanced toward the crowd of phones recording every move, a flicker of vulnerability flashing across her face. "Do you think they'll actually believe it?" she asked quietly, turning to Rasheeda. Rasheeda smiled faintly, her voice carrying just enough for the nearest cameras to catch. "They don't have to believe it," she said. "They just have to see it." The room erupted in another wave of cheers as fans clapped and shouted their approval. Just as the energy began to settle into cautious celebration, the boutique lights dimmed slightly, signaling another planned surprise. A staff member wheeled out a massive cake, layers of white frosting glistening beneath the soft glow. The DJ cut the music as Rasheeda grabbed the microphone, her voice ringing out with playful authority. "Tonight isn't just about fashion," she announced. "It's about second chances, about proving that time can heal what pride tried to destroy." The crowd roared in agreement, the chant of second chances rising until it drowned out every other sound. Kay looked down, blinking rapidly as the emotion of the moment threatened to break through her carefully composed exterior. Rasheeda placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "Tonight," she said softly, "we celebrate more than a comeback. We celebrate growth." The boutique exploded with applause as flashes lit the room like a storm of tiny fireworks. Fans online flooded timelines with screenshots and live commentary. "This is the moment of the year," one post read. "Kay, Michelle and Rasheeda showing real love. I'm not crying, you're crying." The cameras zoomed in on Kay as she raised her glass high, her voice clear and strong. 2 second chances," she declared, her eyes meeting Rasheeda's with a small, defiant smile. "And to proving everybody wrong." Rasheeda lifted her own glass, the two women clinking them together with a crisp, ringing sound that cut through the noise like a promise. The boutique shook with cheers as the DJ brought the music back, louder and brighter than before. For the first time in years, the night felt less like a battleground and more like a beginning. A fragile but undeniable step toward something that neither woman or their millions of fans had dared to imagine. The celebration inside the boutique swelled into a feverish buzz that seemed to ripple through the very walls, each beat of the music matching the racing hearts of everyone packed into the glowing space. Outside, traffic had snarled into a full standstill as fans crowded the sidewalks, their chants rising into the cool Atlanta night like a living soundtrack to the unfolding spectacle. Police cars idled at the corner, their lights flashing red and blue across the boutique windows as officers struggled to keep the sidewalk clear. Inside, every camera phone stayed lifted, recording every breath of K. Michelle and Rasheeda, as if the world might blink and miss the next twist. Kay stood near the center of the room, her ivory coat now draped across a chair, revealing the sleek black jumpsuit that shimmered with every movement. A faint smile played at the edges of her lips as she glanced toward the crowd, but her eyes remained fixed on Rasheeda. "This night," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the music, "feels like a lifetime coming." Rasheeda stepped closer, her champagne glass glinting beneath the boutique's chandeliers. "It is," she replied, her tone warm but edged with meaning, "and it's only just starting." Before Kay could answer, the boutique doors swung open once again, sending a gust of night air across the polished floor. In strode Kirk Frost, Rasheeda's longtime partner, his arrival greeted by a fresh wave of camera flashes and whispered speculation. Dressed in a crisp black jacket and diamond-studded watch that caught the light with every step, Kirk moved through the crowd with the quiet authority of someone used to commanding attention. His gaze locked first on Rasheeda, then on Kay, the weight of unspoken history, heavy in the charged silence. "Looks like I walked into something big," Kirk said, his voice carrying easily over the low hum of music. "I leave for 10 minutes and the whole city decides to crash the party." Rasheeda gave him a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You picked the right 10 minutes, she said. "Atlanta's getting a show tonight." Kay held his gaze with steady calm, the years of old interviews and pointed accusations flashing between them like silent lightning. For a brief second, the air seemed to thicken as fans pressed closer, sensing another potential eruption. Carly Red, ever the fearless commentator, sidled toward the trio with her phone still recording. "Kirk, you seeing this?" she asked breathlessly. "History in the making. This is bigger than any reunion we've ever filmed." Kirk gave a small, knowing smile but kept his eyes on Kay. "I see it," he said. "Question is, do we believe it?" A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the crowd, but Kay didn't flinch. "Believe it or not," she replied evenly, "it's happening." The tension broke slightly as Kirk chuckled, a low, unexpected sound that drew a fresh round of cheers from the audience. "Well," he said, raising his glass, "here's two grown folks finally acting grown." Rasheeda shot him a look half amused, half warning, but she didn't protest. Instead, she turned back to Kay, her voice soft enough that only those closest could hear. "This doesn't erase what happened," she said, "but maybe it's a start." Kay nodded slowly, her eyes shimmering under the boutique lights. "That's all I came for," she said. "A start." The DJ, sensing the moment, faded the music into a slow, pulsing beat that wrapped the boutique in a warm, cinematic glow. Fans inside swayed with the rhythm, some holding their phones high, others clutching each other as if the night itself demanded witnesses. Outside, the chants grew louder. "Second chances, second chances." The sound drifted through the open doors, merging with the bass in a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to promise something bigger than reconciliation, a cultural reset, a rewriting of reality TV's most notorious rivalry. As the crowd settled into the music, Mimi Faust reappeared near the bar, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk circling a field. Carly spotted her first and whispered urgently to Sierra, "If Mimi starts talking again, this night's going off the rails." But Mimi stayed silent, her expression unreadable as she watched Kay and Rasheeda exchange a few quiet words. The decision to remain a spectator, at least for now, carried its own weight, a silent admission that even she recognized the gravity of what was unfolding. Kay turned to the crowd, lifting her glass high. "Tonight isn't about drama," she declared, her voice clear and commanding. "It's about proving that we're more than the headlines, more than the feuds, more than the past." Cheers erupted as Rasheeda stepped beside her, adding, "And it's about showing the world that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's power." The boutique exploded in applause, the sound rising until it drowned out even the music. Fans outside screamed in response, their voices echoing down the block. Suddenly, a loud crash from near the back of the boutique snapped every head around. A tray of champagne flutes had tipped over, sending a spray of sparkling liquid across the polished floor. Gasps filled the room as a young server scrambled to collect the shards of glass. For a tense moment, it felt like a metaphor, the fragile truce shattering as quickly as it had formed. But Rasheeda was quick to act, kneeling to help the server as Kay joined her without hesitation. Their shared effort drew a fresh wave of applause from the crowd, fans shouting encouragement as if the simple act of cleaning broken glass was proof of their new alliance. Carly clutched Sierra's arm, her voice trembling with excitement. "Do you see this?" she whispered. "This isn't just a reunion. This is a whole new era." Sierra nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "It feels different," she said softly, "like maybe all the years of fighting were leading to this." As the server thanked them and the crowd settled again, Rasheeda and Kay rose side by side, their hands brushing in an unplanned moment of connection that set off another burst of camera flashes. "Accidents happen," Rasheeda said lightly, though her voice carried a deeper meaning. Kay met her gaze, a small smile breaking through. "And sometimes," she replied, "they remind us what really matters." The DJ raised the volume, the beat climbing into an infectious groove that invited movement. Slowly, almost cautiously, Rasheeda and Kay began to dance. Their steps small at first, then looser as the crowd clapped and cheered. Kirk joined in with a grin, pulling Carly and Sierra into the growing circle. Even Mimi cracked a smile, her earlier skepticism softening into reluctant admiration. Phones captured every second as the boutique transformed into an impromptu celebration, the line between past and present blurring under the glow of flashing lights. Outside, social media feeds exploded with videos of the night's unexpected climax. "They're dancing together," one fan tweeted. "This is bigger than any finale." Another post read, "Atlanta just witnessed the impossible. K. Michelle and Rasheeda moving as one. My heart can't take it." The hashtag second chances shot to the top of trending lists within minutes, a digital testament to the power of the moment. As the night stretched toward midnight, the boutique felt less like a venue and more like a sanctuary, a place where grudges loosened, where rivals found rhythm, and where the impossible suddenly seemed not only possible but inevitable. Kay glanced toward the door, the faintest smile crossing her lips as if she could already feel the city outside shifting with the weight of what had just happened. Beside her, Rasheeda raised her glass once more, her voice steady and sure. "To tonight," she said, her words slicing clean through the music. "To the start of something none of us could have imagined." And as the crowd roared in agreement, it was clear that the night was not just a comeback but a turning point. A story that would be told and retold long after the last beat faded into memory. The tension only deepened as the cameras captured the slow unraveling of pride and long-buried hurt. After Rasheeda's teary but defiant stand in the studio, K. Michelle retreated to the corner of the green room with her manager whispering rapid instructions about controlling the narrative. "This isn't about a song anymore," K. Michelle muttered, her voice carrying a mix of frustration and nervous excitement. Outside, Kirk hovered near the door like a guard, exchanging tense looks with producers who were torn between keeping the peace and feeding the spectacle that was drawing millions of live viewers. Phones buzzed as fans flooded social media with blow-by-blow reactions, some cheering the reunion while others demanded to know who had crossed the line first. "They're trending worldwide," a producer gasped, waving a tablet at the crew. Inside, Rasheeda dabbed her eyes but stood tall, determined to hold her ground even as memories of their painful history replayed in her mind like a cruel montage. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," she said firmly when K. Michelle finally stepped back into the room. The two women locked eyes, neither willing to give the other an inch of weakness. Silence stretched long enough to make the crew shift nervously before K. Michelle finally broke it with a low, steady voice. "I came back because I'm tired of carrying this fight," she said, "but I won't let anyone rewrite what happened to me." Rasheeda inhaled sharply, her response caught between apology and defense. "I'm not here to rewrite anything. I'm here to face it." The words landed like a challenge, and for a heartbeat the entire set seemed to hold its breath. Just as the tension threatened to snap, a sudden crash outside the door startled everyone. A stagehand stumbled in, breathless, announcing that an unexpected guest had arrived, someone neither Rasheeda nor K. Michelle had seen in years. Someone whose very name had fueled the feud from the beginning. The room fell into stunned silence as the door creaked open and the shadow of the figure stretched across the floor, promising a twist no one had dared imagine. The figure stepped into the room and every whisper died at once. It was Toya, the mutual friend whose quiet conversations years ago had sparked rumors, alliances, and accusations that never fully faded. Fans watching the live stream flooded the chat with frantic comments as her familiar silhouette moved closer to the cameras. "Oh my God, it's her!" someone gasped behind the scenes while the crew scrambled to reposition lights for the unexpected arrival. Toya's eyes flicked between Rasheeda and K. Michelle with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I couldn't stay quiet any longer," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a decade's worth of unsent messages and late-night phone calls that never happened. Rasheeda's lips parted but no words came out, and K. Michelle took an involuntary step back, her hand tightening on the edge of the table. Toya continued. You both built walls so high you forgot who you used to be. And now the whole world is watching while you let the past choke the future. The room remained frozen, the tension thick enough to make even the producers forget their cues. Then, in a sudden surge of emotion, Rasheeda blurted out, "You were part of this too, Toya. Don't pretend you didn't choose sides." The accusation cracked the silence like a thunderclap. And K. Michelle's eyes flashed with a memory she clearly wished had stayed buried. Toya exhaled sharply but didn't back down. "I chose survival," she said, her tone trembling but steady. "And I'm here because it's time to tell the truth." Fans erupted online with theories about hidden betrayals, and the scrolling comments became a storm of shock and speculation. The cameras zoomed in as Toya's gaze shifted directly to K. Michelle. "Tell her," Toya pressed. "Tell her what really happened that night in Atlanta, before all of this started." K. Michelle's face tightened, the conflict between pride and confession flickering in her eyes. She glanced at Rasheeda, whose shoulders stiffened as if bracing for an earthquake. Finally, K. Michelle spoke, her voice low but razor sharp. "You think you're ready for that truth? Because once I say it, there's no going back." The crew held their breath, the lights burned hotter, and every viewer leaning into their screen knew the next words would shatter years of silence and ignite a firestorm that even a warm welcome could not contain. K. Michelle's words hung in the air like a live wire, and for a long moment no one moved. The cameras caught every flicker of hesitation in her eyes as she finally straightened her shoulders and let the memory spill out. "That night in Atlanta," she began, her voice trembling but unyielding, "I wasn't the one who started the rumor. I wasn't the one feeding the blogs. It was someone inside our circle, someone we trusted, and I kept quiet because I thought silence would protect us all." Rasheeda's breath caught as the implications sank in, and Toya's face paled under the harsh studio lights. "Who?" Rasheeda demanded, her voice breaking through the oppressive quiet. K. Michelle met her gaze and answered with deliberate precision. "It was Kirk." The name dropped like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the room, and behind the cameras a producer actually cursed under his breath. Rasheeda froze, her expression a mix of disbelief and dawning recognition, while the crew exchanged uneasy glances. "No," Rasheeda whispered, shaking her head. "You're lying." K. Michelle stepped forward, her tone sharpening with each word. "I wish I were." He fed the story to the blogs because he thought it would distract people from his own mess. "I covered for him because I didn't want to destroy your marriage." The revelation set off a wave of chaos. Kirk, standing near the doorway, took a step forward, his face drained of color. "That's not how it happened," he shouted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "You don't know the full story." Rasheeda spun toward him, her eyes blazing with betrayal. "Then tell me the full story, Kirk, right now, on camera." The crew scrambled to keep the mics open as fans watching the live stream flooded social media with explosive reactions. Hashtags calling out Kirk trended within minutes, and the chat feed became an endless cascade of shock and outrage. Kirk raised his hands as if to calm the storm, but his words only added fuel to the fire. "I did it to protect us," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought if I gave them something small, they'd stop digging into the bigger problems we had." Rasheeda's voice cracked as she stepped closer, her anger mixing with heartbreak. "You betrayed me to save yourself. You let me fight her for years while you sat on the truth." The room pulsed with raw emotion, the weight of a decade-long feud shifting in an instant. Toya stepped between them, tears brimming in her eyes. "This is the moment," she said softly. "You either let this destroy you, or you finally let it heal you." The cameras zoomed in on Rasheeda's trembling hands as she stared at Kirk. Her marriage and her friendship balanced on the knife's edge of a single decision. Under the searing studio lights, the night dragged on like a storm that refused to break, and every breath from Rasheeda, K, Michelle, Toya, and Kirk carried the tension of 10 years of unsaid words as producers waved for the cameras to keep rolling and millions of viewers across the world stayed glued to their screens, flooding the live chat with heart emojis, broken hearts, fire symbols, and frantic pleas for someone to finally tell the entire truth, while Rasheeda stood in the center of it all, fighting the urge to collapse under the weight of a marriage cracked wide open and a friendship resurrected only to be scorched again, her mind replaying the early days when she and K. Michelle had shared late-night studio sessions, whispered dreams of chart-topping hits, and the kind of sisterhood that once felt bulletproof before betrayal and gossip ripped through it like a blade. Now, as Kirk tried to speak over the growing roar of fans chanting, "Tell it all," Rasheeda raised one trembling hand and forced him into silence. Her voice, a low steady current as she demanded every detail he had buried, every text message, every midnight phone call that had fed the blogs and turned best friends into enemies. And as Kirk stumbled through a halting confession admitting that years ago he had overheard an argument between Toya and a producer, and leaked fragments of it to deflect attention from a brewing scandal involving his own secret investments in a rival label, the room seemed to tilt, the crew clinging to their headsets as emotions boiled over. K. Michelle pressed forward, her own voice cutting through the chaos as she revealed how she had spent years carrying the blame to protect Rasheeda from public humiliation, how she had endured late-night hate messages, cancelled gigs, and even industry blacklisting, while Kirk quietly maneuvered behind the scenes. And with every revelation, the audience outside the studio turned the internet into a battlefield of hashtags, hashtag Team RASHEEDA, hashtag Justice4K, hashtag Kirk exposed until even mainstream outlets began breaking into live coverage of what one commentator called the most explosive reality television moment of the decade. Yet inside the room time felt strangely slow, each second stretching as Rasheeda's eyes filled with tears of fury and loss, her voice rising into a near shout as she demanded to know why Kirk had allowed her to live in suspicion of the very friend who once carried her secrets and dreams. And Kirk, cornered and pale, could only stammer that he had been terrified of losing both his marriage and his business empire, a confession that drew a sharp intake of breath from Toya, who finally stepped between them, urging everyone to see the wreckage for what it was and pleading for a kind of peace none of them believed possible. But before Rasheeda could answer, the studio doors swung open yet again, and a new figure entered, a record executive whose sudden appearance sent a ripple of fresh panic through the crew as she carried a manila envelope rumored to contain contracts, emails, and hidden recordings from the night the feud began, a trove of evidence that could either vindicate K. Michelle completely or shatter what little remained of trust between Rasheeda and Kirk. And as the envelope hit the table with a sharp slap, the tension reached a fever pitch, fans online screaming in all caps for someone to open it, Kirk backing away like the papers themselves were a live grenade, Rasheeda gripping the edge of the table to keep from collapsing, and K. Michelle leaning forward with a calm that masked the storm inside her as she declared that the truth had waited long enough, her words igniting a final crescendo of gasps, tears, and shouted accusations that blended into a single relentless roar of history, heartbreak, and the faint fragile hope that somewhere inside this night of revelation there might still be room for forgiveness. The studio had turned into a living pressure cooker, the walls trembling with the weight of secrets finally clawing their way into the open as Rasheeda stood rooted in the harsh glow of the overhead lights, her heart pounding like a bass drum while Kirk's shallow breaths betrayed the fear he tried to hide behind his rigid stance. And the unopened manila envelope sat on the center table like a living thing, daring someone to break the seal and unleash the last wave of revelations that could either free them all or ruin everything they had fought to build. While K. Michelle kept her eyes fixed on Rasheeda, silently willing her to find the strength to open it, and Toya shifted nervously, glancing between the three of them as if she too understood that the next few minutes would decide whether this night ended in healing or an explosion that no PR team could contain. Because inside that envelope were not just contracts and recordings but the receipts of every hidden conversation, every shady backroom deal, and every whispered confession that had fed a decade of betrayal and suspicion. And as the cameras zoomed in tighter, Rasheeda finally reached forward with a trembling hand, the sound of the seal tearing, echoing like a gunshot through the silent room, the papers sliding free with a slow hiss as she pulled the first page into the light and read aloud an email dated from the very week the feud began. A message from Kirk to a gossip blogger, promising exclusive information in exchange for silence about his own financial dealings. The words so sharp and undeniable that the crew audibly gasped, and even K. Michelle, who had long suspected Kirk's involvement, pressed a hand to her mouth as the cruel confirmation settled over her. And still Rasheeda kept reading, page after page, revealing how Kirk had quietly manipulated headlines, arranging meets and phone calls to plant just enough poison to keep the feud alive while diverting attention from his own string of investments in rival artists, each revelation twisting the knife deeper into Rasheeda's chest as memories of every sleepless night spent doubting K. Michelle flashed before her eyes, until she finally dropped the papers onto the table and turned toward her husband with a look that mixed fury and devastation, her voice rising into a trembling scream that sent a shiver through the crew as she demanded to know how he could betray not just her trust but their entire circle of friends for the sake of business. And Kirk, cornered and exposed, tried to defend himself with halting words about pressure, fear, and protecting their brand. But his excuses dissolved under the relentless truth written across the pages now glowing under the studio lights. And K. Michelle seized the moment to finally speak her own truth. stepping forward with tears streaking her cheeks as she described the years of isolation she endured, the cancelled shows, the lost endorsements, and the nights spent wondering if Rasheeda hated her enough to let the world tear her apart. Her voice breaking as she admitted she had almost walked away from music altogether, and the confession drew a collective gasp from the audience watching at home, the live chat exploding into frantic pleas for reconciliation while hashtags like #ForgiveKMICHell and #RASHEEDA deserves better climbed to the top of trending lists around the world, but inside the studio there was no easy script to follow, only the raw ache of truth as Rasheeda turned from Kirk to K. Michelle. Her anger colliding with a sudden rush of regret as she realized how much pain her silence had allowed to fester. And in a voice barely above a whisper she finally said the words fans had waited years to hear, "I'm sorry." A simple apology that carried the weight of every headline, every lost year, every bitter lyric exchanged across interviews and diss tracks. And for a heartbeat the room softened, K. Michelle stepping forward to pull Rasheeda into an embrace that felt both fragile and unbreakable as the crew wiped away tears behind the cameras and Toya clapped a trembling hand over her mouth. Yet even in that moment of tentative peace, the story refused to settle, because Kirk, his voice cracking with desperation, suddenly dropped to his knees and begged for forgiveness, promising to rebuild trust, brick by brick, even as fans online erupted with demands for accountability, their furious comments streaming across the screen faster than the moderators could keep up. And Rasheeda, still holding K. Michelle, looked down at the man who had upended their lives and answered with a steady resolve that echoed through the studio, "This isn't about saving a brand anymore. This is about saving our souls." Words that sent chills through the audience and even the hardened producers who knew they had captured not just a viral moment, but a turning point in reality television history, because in that charged silence that followed, the cameras caught something no script could fake: a family at the edge of destruction, choosing, against all odds, to face the wreckage together, the sound of their shared breathing filling the studio as fans around the world held their breath and waited to see whether the night would end in redemption, separation, or the messy, uncertain space in between where real healing begins. The night refused to release its grip as the studio pulsed with the raw electricity of everything that had been revealed and everything that still hung in the air like an unanswered prayer. And while the crew silently adjusted cameras to capture every flicker of emotion, Rasheeda stood motionless at the center of the set, her heart beating in a rhythm that seemed to echo through the very floor beneath her feet, as Kirk remained kneeling, his eyes shimmering with a mixture of shame and desperate hope, while K. Michelle and Toya hovered close enough to catch Rasheeda if she wavered, yet wise enough not to interrupt the gravity of the moment, because what unfolded next was no longer a reality show but the unfiltered collapse and rebuilding of trust in real time. And the millions watching through screens across the globe could feel it too, flooding social media with breathless commentary and live reactions that turned the internet into a collective heartbeat. Every post and tweet pulsing with the same question: would Rasheeda forgive? Would K. Michelle stay? Would this fragile alliance survive the night? Rasheeda finally broke the silence with a slow, deliberate inhale, her eyes never leaving Kirk's as she recounted the long nights she had spent defending him against whispers of infidelity, the public interviews where she had smiled through rumors and stood by his side, believing that loyalty would be enough, her voice tightening as she confessed how each revelation tonight felt like a blade cutting through years of sacrifice. And Kirk flinched at every word, his shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth he could no longer hide. Until finally he whispered a plea so soft it barely reached the microphones. "I was scared of losing you." And though the sentence hung fragile in the air, it struck Rasheeda like a cruel echo of every excuse she had heard before, every promise of change that dissolved under the glare of public life. Yet instead of turning away, she stepped closer, her voice steady and almost frightening in its calm, as she told him that fear is no excuse for betrayal, that love cannot thrive in shadows, her words slicing through the tension like a clean blade, even as her hand trembled with the effort of keeping her composure. K. Michelle, moved by the fragile honesty unfolding before her, spoke next, her voice carrying both exhaustion and relief, as she described the silent war she had fought for years, the music she had poured her heartbreak into, and the countless times she had replayed old memories of laughter and late-night studio sessions, wondering how friendship had curdled into venom. Her confession drawing murmurs from the crew and sending fans online into a storm of emotional messages, some demanding justice, others pleading for reconciliation, all of them united by the spectacle of 3 lives laid bare before a relentless audience. Toya, who had stood at the edges of every revelation, finally stepped forward and addressed them all with a trembling but commanding presence, reminding Rasheeda and K. Michelle of the young women they once were before fame and gossip hardened them, her voice breaking as she recounted the night she had first heard the rumor. Kirk leaked and the guilt she carried for not speaking up sooner, a confession that brought fresh tears to Rasheeda's eyes and a quiet nod from K. Michelle, who reached out to squeeze Toya's hand in silent forgiveness, and as the four of them stood together in a loose circle of pain and tentative unity, the cameras captured something that reality television rarely dares to show: the slow, fragile birth of accountability. The kind of raw honesty that cannot be faked or edited into neat soundbites. And though producers whispered about ratings and live feeds, the people in that room seemed to forget the world outside as they focused on one another, breathing the same heavy air and letting the silence speak where words would only wound. Until finally Rasheeda turned back to Kirk and said in a voice both tired and resolute that forgiveness was not a single moment but a road they would have to walk day by day, a road lined with boundaries, therapy, and the unflinching truth. And Kirk, tears streaking his face, nodded with a sincerity that startled even the jaded camera crew, promising to follow that road no matter how long it took. While K, Michelle and Toya exchanged a look that carried both relief and exhaustion, the unspoken understanding that their friendship, too, would need time to heal, but that tonight had at least opened the door. Outside the studio, the digital world exploded into a frenzy of think pieces, reaction videos, and celebrity tweets, with hashtags like #healing in real time, #KMICHell returns, and #RASHEEDA strong dominating every platform as fans analyzed every glance and every word. But inside the room a quiet calm finally settled, the four of them sinking onto the studio couches, as producers called for a break and the crew lowered their cameras, leaving only the soft hum of the lights and the sound of breathing to fill the space where chaos had once reigned. And though no one could predict what tomorrow's headlines would bring, for the first time in years they sat together not as rivals or enemies but as human beings stripped of pretense, sharing a silence that felt less like an ending and more like the first uncertain step toward something that might, if they nurtured it, grow into peace. The studio lingered in a strange hush after the cameras powered down for a scheduled break, but the silence carried its own heavy soundtrack of deep breaths, faint shuffling, and the low buzz of cell phones vibrating with a world's worth of reactions outside those walls. And as Rasheeda leaned back against the couch cushions, she felt the full weight of the night pressing down on her chest, each confession and accusation still echoing like a relentless drumbeat, while Kirk sat opposite her with red-rimmed eyes, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles blanched white, and K. Michelle rested a careful distance away, her posture tense yet softened by a glimmer of exhausted relief, while Toya hovered near the edge of the group, her presence both grounding and unsettling because it reminded everyone that friendship had once been the very thing worth protecting before fame turned it into a weapon. And for a few fragile minutes they simply breathed the same air, for people tangled in the wreckage of their own choices. As the crew whispered in corners and producers debated whether to stretch the live broadcast into a second night to capture every remaining ripple of fallout, because ratings like this came once in a lifetime, but inside the room the spectacle of television felt strangely irrelevant compared to the private storm still brewing between husband, wife, and former friend. Rasheeda finally broke the quiet with a voice low and rough from hours of tears, telling Kirk that the hardest part of betrayal wasn't the rumors or the business deals, but the years stolen from the love they once shared, years when she had stood on stages defending him while silently wondering why her heart felt heavier with every applause. And Kirk, unable to look away, admitted that fear had driven every bad choice he made, fear of losing control, fear of public humiliation, fear of watching their carefully built empire collapsed under the weight of his own mistakes. And though his words landed like tiny shards of glass, they also carried a vulnerability Rasheeda had not heard in years, stirring a complicated ache that was neither forgiveness nor anger but something more fragile and dangerous, a faint, reluctant hope that maybe the man kneeling before her was finally ready to face himself. K. Michelle, who had spent a decade carrying scars from both of them, shifted forward with a sudden urgency, her voice cutting through the thick air as she described the lonely years when music had been her only refuge, when every headline about their feud felt like a personal attack and every cancelled show a reminder that truth rarely wins in an industry built on spectacle. Her confession, trembling with a mix of pain and pride as she revealed how close she had come to quitting altogether, before deciding to fight back with songs that told her story even when no one wanted to hear it, a revelation that made Rasheeda's chest tighten with regret and drew a murmured "I'm sorry" from Kirk. whose guilt deepened with each word. Toya reached out then, placing a steadying hand on K. Michelle's shoulder and speaking softly about the years she too had spent watching from the sidelines, trapped between loyalty and silence. Wishing she had spoken sooner but terrified of being dragged into a war she barely understood, and her trembling voice carried a truth that resonated with everyone in the room, that friendship, love, and fame could never coexist without sacrifice, and that each of them had paid a price they were only now beginning to count. Outside, the world devoured every leaked clip and producer-fed teaser, hashtags, multiplying faster than the crew could track them, with celebrities weighing in and talk shows already booking segments to debate whether Rasheeda should forgive Kirk, whether K. Michelle's comeback would dominate the charts, and whether this night marked a turning point for reality television, or simply another high-water mark in the endless cycle of public spectacle. Yet inside the studio, the people at the center of it all seemed to drift beyond the reach of headlines as they sank deeper into conversation, trading raw admissions that cameras captured but could never fully translate. Rasheeda spoke of sleepless nights and whispered prayers, Kirk of childhood fears and the crushing pressure to appear unbreakable, K. Michelle of the music industry's cruelty and the quiet strengths it took to survive it, and Toya, of watching people she loved tear each other apart while she swallowed truths that threatened to choke her. And as their words overlapped and softened the hard edges of the night, a fragile sense of connection began to flicker among them, a recognition that their wounds, though self-inflicted in public, were still human at their core. By the time the producers signaled that cameras would resume in 5 minutes, Rasheeda looked at Kirk with eyes that carried both the fury of betrayal and the weary tenderness of shared history, telling him in a voice that trembled with both strength and sorrow that forgiveness, if it came, would not be a single moment captured for ratings but a long, unglamorous road paved with transparency and daily effort, and Kirk, tears streaking down his face, nodded with a quiet resolve that startled even the seasoned crew, promising to do the work no matter how long it took. While K. Michelle reached for Rasheeda's hand with a tentative smile that hinted at the possibility of a friendship reborn from ashes, and Toya, exhaling a breath she felt she had held for a decade, whispered that maybe this night was not the end of their story, but the first fragile step toward a peace they had all once thought impossible. The storm outside pressed against the old windows with a steady moan as the night deepened, wrapping the house in a restless hush that seemed to pulse with the leftover tension of everything that had happened earlier. And inside the dimly lit room the air felt heavy with unsaid words, breaths coming slow and deliberate as each of them tried to find a footing in the swirl of revelations that had turned their lives inside out, because no matter how many explanations had been offered, and no matter how many tears had already fallen, there remained an ache that no apology could soften. An ache born not only of betrayal, but of the quiet recognition that love itself had been tested to its cruelest limits. And when Malik finally moved from the corner where he had been standing, for what felt like hours, the soft creak of the floorboards carried more weight than a shouted confession, drawing every eye toward him as he paused, one hand grazing the back of a chair for balance while his gaze settled on Zara with a mixture of exhaustion and defiance, as if daring anyone to stop him from speaking. And when his voice emerged, it was low and rough, a sound shaped by nights of unspoken fear. He said that the truth had never been about winning or losing, that it was about survival, about keeping the fragile thread of their shared history from snapping under the strain of secrets too dark for daylight. And the room seemed to shrink around his words, each syllable pressing against the walls like a slow tide while Zara's chest tightened, memories spilling through her mind of the early days when trust was a simple thing and laughter came easy. Memories now blurred by the raw knowledge of what he had hidden and why. And though anger had been her first response, there was now a hollow space inside her where anger could not reach. A space filled instead with the dull throb of understanding, because deep down she knew that Malik's silence had not been born of cruelty but of a desperate need to protect what little innocence they still possessed. And as he stepped closer, the shadows stretched across his face in sharp relief, the candlelight flickering against the planes of his jaw as he admitted that every choice he had made had been for her, and for the small circle of people they still dared to call family, that each lie had been a wall built to keep danger out even as it kept love locked away. And the sound of his confession carried a strange power, weaving through the room like a slow melody that made even the most skeptical hearts hesitate. And in that fragile pause, Zara felt the weight of her own choices press back, the nights she had turned away, the moments when fear had guided her hand more than faith. And she saw in Malik not a villain but a mirror of her own flawed resolve, a human being bound by the same impossible need to guard what he loved even when the cost was unbearable. And the silence that followed stretched so long, it seemed the walls themselves were holding their breath, Until finally, a single tear traced the edge of Zara's cheek, and she stepped forward, closing the distance between them with the quiet grace of someone who has decided that love, however battered, is still worth the fight. Her fingers trembling as they reached for his, a small gesture that spoke louder than any speech. And when their hands met, the room shifted almost imperceptibly, a collective exhale rolling through the gathered friends who had been watching from the edges, their own hearts caught between relief and dread. Because though this moment felt like a fragile beginning, it was also the threshold of an uncertain future where forgiveness would not erase the scars, but might, if tended with care, transform them into something close to strength. And as the clock in the hallway struck midnight, the sound echoed like a promise, steady and unyielding, marking not an ending but the slow birth of a new chapter in which every decision from this point on would carry the memory of the night. They chose to face the darkness together, rather than alone. The night air pressed colder against the glass as if testing the fragile warmth inside. And with every soft gust, the candle flames bent and straightened again like small hearts refusing to surrender, their flicker casting restless patterns across the worn floor where Malik and Zara now stood hand in hand, neither willing to speak first because each knew that words would either build the bridge they needed, or shatter it beyond repair. And around them the others kept a respectful distance, though their eyes betrayed the anxious pull of curiosity. For everyone in that room had been altered by the long evening of confessions, alliances shifting like tides as secrets once buried beneath years of routine rose to the surface and demanded reckoning. And it was Noreen who finally broke the quiet, her voice calm, but carrying the steel of someone who had watched too many friendships crumble under the weight of pride. She reminded them that forgiveness was not a single act but a series of choices made again and again, even when anger begged for control. And her words settled over the group like a slow drizzle, seeping into the cracks of old resentments until even the most stubborn among them felt the stirrings of reluctant empathy, while Malik, still holding Zara's trembling fingers, nodded with a weariness that came from battles fought mostly within himself. He spoke then, not to defend his past, but to sketch the fragile outlines of the future he hoped they might still share, describing plans once whispered only in the solitude of sleepless nights. A small home away from the chaos, mornings free of suspicion, the quiet courage of ordinary days where love could grow in peace. And as he painted these modest dreams, the room seemed to exhale, shoulders dropping, eyes softening. Because for all their differences, every soul present knew the longing for a life unbroken by betrayal. Yet even as hope flickered, there remained the heavy knowledge that dreams alone could not erase the damage already done. And Zara felt that truth like a stone in her chest, her mind replaying the painful hours of doubt, the sharp memory of each unanswered question, each night spent wondering if the man before her was stranger or savior, until finally she drew a slow breath and let the ache settle without letting it rule her, speaking with a clarity that surprised even herself as she said that love without trust was a house built on shifting sand, that she needed more than apologies and tender promises. She needed action, proof in the quiet details of daily life. And Malik met her gaze without flinching, his eyes shadowed by regret but lit by a resolve that felt steady. He told her that he understood, that he was prepared to spend however long it took to earn back what his silence had broken, and something in the plainness of that vow loosened the tight knot in Zara's chest, for it carried no grand gestures, only the humble strength of a man finally ready to be known. And when she nodded, just barely, it was enough to send a ripple of quiet relief through the watching group. A signal that while the road ahead would be hard, it would be walked together. And outside, the first pale suggestion of dawn began to brush the horizon, a thin silver line that promised morning even as the stars still clung to their fading night. And one by one the others began to move, gathering coats and whispered goodbyes, their footsteps soft but their glances lingering, each person carrying away a private lesson about the fragile endurance of love and the quiet heroism of staying when leaving would be easier, until only Malik and Zara remained in the hushed room, the silence between them no longer heavy with accusation but alive with the cautious rhythm of hearts daring to hope. And as the earliest bird calls threaded through the cold air, they stood side by side, watching the light grow, neither speaking, letting the slow birth of morning bear witness to a promise that would require every ounce of patience they possessed. When the first rays finally spilled across the horizon and painted the worn floorboards in a pale wash of gold, Malik felt the weight of the long night shift inside him like a tide turning after a storm, a quiet certainty replacing the restless guilt that had driven every word and glance since the evening began. And he reached for Zara's hand once more, not with the urgency of a man desperate to be forgiven but with the steady calm of someone who understood that love was built in the patient repetition of small gestures, a truth that did not escape the others who lingered at the edges of the house as if reluctant to leave. For though they had gathered expecting a spectacle of accusations and dramatic exits, they found themselves instead drawn into an unfolding proof that reconciliation could be as gripping as conflict. Each whispered conversation in the shadowed hallway carrying its own mixture of awe and disbelief as friends who once doubted. Malik's sincerity began to admit, quietly at first and then with growing conviction, that perhaps a heart battered by mistakes could still choose redemption. And outside the neighborhood stirred to life, early risers pausing as they passed the modest home to trade rumors about the reunion that had captured the night. Their voices carrying snippets of wonder. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high. The family was left divided yet somehow more united than before, and these murmurs drifted back through the open windows like a chorus of witnesses, weaving themselves into the fragile peace that now settled over the living room, where Zara at last found the courage to break the soft silence, telling Malik that she would not pretend the path ahead was simple or swift. That rebuilding trust meant facing the everyday temptations to retreat into old habits, but she added with a faint, tired smile that she was willing to begin. And those words, quiet as they were, landed with the force of a promise, drawing a slow breath of relief from Malik as he pulled her gently into an embrace that carried none of the desperate clinging of earlier hours, only the grounded warmth of two people choosing, deliberately, to stay. While behind them Noreen exchanged a knowing glance with the few friends who remained, her eyes shining with the complicated satisfaction of someone who had shepherded a long night of chaos into a morning of unexpected grace. And she whispered that sometimes the greatest drama is not in the breaking but in the careful mending, a sentiment that would echo across social media within hours as fans flooded comment sections with stories of their own reconciliations, their own late-night arguments turned fragile truces, until the names Malik and Zara trended far beyond the quiet neighborhood that had witnessed their transformation, their story becoming a mirror for countless unseen struggles. And as the sun climbed higher, casting sharper beams through the curtains, the house itself seemed to breathe easier, its walls no longer resonant with accusation but humming with the quiet music of renewed possibility. And when Malik finally stepped outside to meet the gathering crowd of friends and neighbors, he felt not the judgment he once feared, but an unexpected warmth, a collective willingness to believe that even the most tangled relationships could find their way back to light. And though cameras captured the scene and voices rose in excited speculation, he barely noticed, for all his attention remained on the woman who now stood beside him, her expression guarded yet open, a face that carried the marks of a sleepless night and the dawning hope of a new beginning. And together they walked down the narrow path toward the waiting morning, each step a small but unmistakable declaration that love, however bruised, can still rise, surprising even those who thought the night had already decided the ending. As Malik and Zara stepped onto the dewy path that led away from the house, the chill of the morning air pressed against them, sharp yet invigorating, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant blooms. And with each cautious step, the tension of the night seemed to settle a little deeper into something less jagged, something that resembled fragile hope, because for the first time in hours, neither fear nor anger led their movements, only a quiet deliberation born of hard-won honesty, the kind that demanded patience and the courage to remain present even when old wounds ached in protest. And behind them, the few friends who had stayed behind watched with a mixture of awe and tentative optimism, understanding that what they were witnessing was rare, the kind of emotional unspooling that reality shows might script but reality itself seldom delivers. And every small gesture between Malik and Zara, hand brushing over a sleeve, a shared glance, the slightest upward tilt of a head carried weight far heavier than any dramatic pronouncement could, telling a story of vulnerability, endurance, and the careful negotiation of trust, while K. Michelle, standing slightly apart with Toya beside her, felt a pang of recognition for her own journey through betrayal and forgiveness. The night's revelations mirrored in her own experiences, and she quietly admitted to herself that the spectacle of their struggle had also been a reflection of what she had endured in silence, each unspoken truth she had carried now appearing almost tangible in the warm morning light. And Toya, sensing the delicate balance of emotions, kept a steady watch, knowing that even small missteps could undo the fragile thread woven over the long night, the memory of past conflicts weighing on her mind like a ghost that refused to depart, whispering caution, even as the scene before them shimmered with possibility. And as Malik finally turned to Zara, his eyes catching the pale sunlight, he spoke with a quiet firmness that carried no trace of the desperate edge from hours earlier, admitting that the work ahead would be long, that every day would require choices that reinforced trust and demonstrated honesty. not just in grand gestures but in the subtle acts of daily life, a philosophy he had only come to understand through the ordeal of his mistakes. And Zara, hearing him, nodded with a mixture of relief and wariness, knowing that words alone could not repair the past but recognizing that commitment to consistency might be the closest thing to redemption. And as they began walking toward the edge of the property, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot mingling with the distant hum of early traffic, the small group of friends behind them exchanged quiet glances, each silently calculating how much support would be needed to keep the fragile peace intact. Because everyone knew the night's drama had altered more than relationships, it had exposed vulnerabilities, loyalties, and the true depth of human emotion, the kind that cannot be neatly contained by scripts or hashtags. Even as millions of online spectators continued to dissect every frame, every glance, every fleeting expression for signs of ultimate reconciliation or the inevitable relapse into conflict, the world outside, unaware of the subtleties that could only be sensed in real time, in the slow cadence of breaths, in the tiny gestures that spoke louder than any camera lens could ever fully capture. And as Malik and Zara paused near the gate, the rising sun catching the soft outlines of their figures, they shared a long, quiet moment, neither speaking, their hands still entwined, the silence between them full, yet unburdened, as if the night's revelations had cleared the path for a morning that was theirs to claim. And in that moment, the fragile tension of the previous hours seemed to release, a collective exhale that rippled through everyone present. Even the birds perched nearby, their calls mingling with the low murmur of the wind, creating a symphony of ordinary life that felt extraordinary after the intensity of the previous night. And Malik, finally breaking the quiet, whispered a single word that carried more weight than any public confession could, "Together." And Zara, smiling faintly, responded not with words but with a subtle squeeze of the hand, the kind of communication that needed no translation, no embellishment, just the honest acknowledgement that they had survived, at least for now. And the others, witnessing this simple yet profound interaction, felt a mix of admiration, relief, and cautious hope, understanding that reconciliation is rarely loud or cinematic, but often found in the quiet certainty of shared commitment. And as they walked down the driveway toward the waiting cars, the soft glow of the sun illuminating their path, the entire group carried a sense of renewal, not as though the past had been erased but as though they had finally learned how to navigate its shadows together. And though the cameras had captured every moment, every emotional tremor, the true story of trust earned slowly, of vulnerability embraced, of the possibility of love surviving its own trials, remained alive in the way Malik and Zara moved, in the silent acknowledgements between friends, and in the quiet spaces where words had failed but understanding had grown. And the morning, stretching long and bright, promised that while the road ahead would be neither smooth nor short, it was theirs to walk, with each step a testament to endurance, courage, and the fragile, persistent hope that some bonds, once broken, can be rebuilt stronger than before. The sun climbed higher, casting long beams that cut across the driveway and caught the subtle movements of leaves dancing in the morning breeze. And as Malik and Zara stepped into the quiet hum of the neighborhood, there was a strange stillness, almost reverence, as if the world outside had paused to witness their fragile reconciliation. And though the streets were already alive with joggers, early traffic, and neighbors beginning their day, the weight of what had transpired inside the house lingered like a cloak, pressing against every heartbeat and shadow, because what they had endured was more than a night of confrontation. It was the raw exposure of every fear, every insecurity, every act of silence that had piled into years of misunderstanding and half-truths. And the knowledge that this exposure could have shattered them entirely hung like a taut wire between them. Yet here they walked, side by side, hands still entwined, testing the resilience of their bond with each cautious step, feeling the world around them as if for the first time, tasting the crisp air and the quiet hum of life that had gone unnoticed for far too long. And behind them, the small group of friends followed with measured footsteps, their eyes flicking between Malik and Zara, reading subtle gestures, expressions, the tiny signals of vulnerability and trust, understanding that every motion mattered, because in moments like these, where a relationship teeters between collapse and rebirth, the unspoken speaks louder than words. And Noreen, walking slightly behind, kept a careful watch, sensing the lingering fragility, her own experiences with fractured friendships giving her an almost preternatural sense of timing, knowing when to step forward with reassurance and when to step back to allow the process to unfold naturally. While Michelle, still processing her own reflections from the night, marveled at the understated grace of this reconciliation, recognizing in Malik and Zara's quiet persistence the same courage she had discovered in herself during her return to music. A courage that demanded facing the truth regardless of the consequences. And Toya, her presence steady as ever, noted with a mix of relief and admiration the subtle shifts in energy, the careful, almost tentative, warmth that had begun to emerge between the couple, a stark contrast to the charged intensity of the night before. And as they reached the corner where the neighborhood's familiar oak tree stood, Malik paused, letting go of Zara's hand just long enough to offer a small, genuine smile, one that carried no apology, no pretense, only the raw honesty of someone who had confronted his failures and chosen to carry their weight into the light. And Zara, reading the complexity behind that smile, returned it, a slow, measured curve of lips that conveyed both understanding and wariness, a silent agreement that while trust would not be rebuilt in hours or days, this small acknowledgement of presence was a start. And as the friends trailed behind, exchanging quiet words about resilience, patience, and human frailty, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of birds, and the gentle hum of morning traffic seemed to harmonize with the rhythm of their fragile peace, reinforcing the lesson that recovery is rarely dramatic, that healing often takes the form of subtle gestures and unwavering presence. And Malik, sensing the significance of this quiet journey, spoke softly to Zara, reminding her that the night's revelations had been just one chapter, and though the pain of the past could never be erased, their future depended on the decisions they would make moving forward, the small commitments, the daily acts of care, honesty, and patience that would slowly solidify the foundations shaken by betrayal. And as Zara nodded, acknowledging both the truth of his words and the challenge ahead, a small sense of calm settled over them, as if by consciously recognizing the fragility, they had already begun to master it, and in that quiet determination, every step became a testament to human endurance, the kind of resilience born not from the absence of hardship but from the courage to confront it together, a realization that resonated with everyone present, who, in their own ways, reflected on past mistakes, regrets, and the subtle ways in which love and loyalty demand both vulnerability and strength. And as the group reached the edge of the block where the neighborhood opened onto a sun-dappled street, the soft sounds of life blending with the promise of a new day, Malik and Zara shared one final glance before stepping onto the street, a look heavy with shared history but bright with possibility, and the quiet resolve that had begun in the house that night now stretched with them into the morning light, leaving behind only echoes of past conflicts and carrying forward the fragile but undeniable hope that some bonds, tested in the fire of human imperfection, could rise stronger than before. The morning sunlight streamed over the rooftops, cutting through the remnants of last night's storm with a quiet insistence, and Malik and Zara moved down the street, side by side, their shadows stretching long across the pavement as if echoing the distance they had traveled together, not just physically, but emotionally, across years of misunderstandings, betrayals, and silent fears. And every step seemed deliberate, measured, a reflection of the careful recalibration their relationship demanded, because though the night had forced truths into the open, daylight demanded action, small consistent actions that would prove the sincerity of every confession. And as they walked, neighbors who had emerged for morning routines paused to watch, sensing the subtle gravity of the couple's demeanor, whispering among themselves about the drama they had only glimpsed through fleeting news clips or gossip, unaware of the depth, the emotional labor, and the fragile trust being carried in each glance and gesture. And Malik, feeling the weight of eyes on him, let his gaze linger on Zara with quiet intensity, conveying that their connection no longer needed to be loud or performative to be real, that survival, honesty, and commitment were enough to sustain what they had almost lost. And Zara, feeling the steady pulse of his sincerity, mirrored him with a small smile, the kind that carries both relief and cautious expectation. And behind them, their friends maintained a careful distance, watching for signs of strain, misstep, or relapse into old patterns, their own hearts pounding not from drama but from the recognition that the emotional stakes in this scene exceeded anything the cameras could capture, because what they were witnessing was the subtle art of reconciliation, the deliberate, daily work that must follow nights of confession. And Michelle, standing slightly apart, reflected on her own experiences, remembering the long stretches of isolation, the endless hours of recording songs that bled her soul because the world had demanded spectacle, not truth. And in watching Malik and Zara, she realized that some battles were fought in silence and subtle gestures. That triumph could be quiet, internal, almost invisible to the casual observer, yet no less profound. And Toya, observing with a steady presence, noted the tension in the way Zara's shoulders relaxed slightly, the way Malik's steps slowed to match her own, sensing that in these small alignments, trust was being rebuilt brick by brick, and every gesture, every glance mattered more than any public statement, more than any trending hashtag or viral clip, because in the quiet endurance of ordinary movements, the reality of reconciliation asserted itself, stronger than any dramatic confrontation ever could. And as the couple reached a small park where the morning light caught the dew on the grass, Malik paused and turned to Zara, speaking softly of the challenges ahead, the patience required, the mistakes that could not be erased, yet also of the beauty inherent in choosing to face them together. And Zara, hearing him, nodded, understanding that hope alone would not suffice, that love needed to be continually proven through acts, through presence, through the courage to remain exposed and vulnerable, even when fear whispered to retreat. And as they continued walking, the world around them seemed to respond. The chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves, even the distant hum of traffic blending into a subtle symphony of renewal, while their friends whispered among themselves, commenting on the strength it took to sustain this delicate balance. The remarkable fortitude required to transform a night of explosive emotion into a morning of deliberate calm. And in that quiet procession, Malik and Zara's steps became a rhythm, a heartbeat that anchored the small group, demonstrating that even in a world addicted to spectacle, the most powerful stories often unfold in measured silences, in the gentle negotiation of human frailty and courage. And as they approached a quiet bench by the park's edge, Malik took Zara's hand once more, squeezing it in a gesture that spoke volumes, a silent promise to remain, to act, to choose her, and the fragile trust they were rebuilding with every breath. And Zara, feeling the gravity of the moment, leaned slightly into him, allowing the warmth of his presence to replace the tension of uncertainty, the small, deliberate act signaling the fragile, ongoing process of mending not just a relationship but two souls scarred by the same history of fear and miscommunication. And as they sat together on the weathered wood, the sunlight catching the glint of dew on Malik's watch and the soft shimmer of Zara's hair, the room behind them, or rather, the house they had left just hours ago, felt like a distant memory, a place where secrets had festered and words had been withheld. While here, under the expansive morning sky, every breath, every movement carried the potential for redemption. And in that shared presence, a new understanding crystallized. That reconciliation was not a destination but a journey, a series of conscious, vulnerable decisions made together, step by step, gesture by gesture, heartbeat by heartbeat. And as the park began to fill with the morning rhythm of life, joggers, dog walkers, and cyclists passing by, Malik and Zara seemed to inhabit a different plane, one where the past was acknowledged, but no longer dictating the present, where each choice could be measured, intentional, a deliberate act of love and courage. And their friends, witnessing this, felt their own hearts lighten, realizing that perhaps some stories of betrayal and pain do not end in ruin but in the quiet triumph of human resilience and commitment. The gentle hum of the morning settled into a rhythm around Malik and Zara as they walked through the park, the air still carrying the faint scent of rain from the previous night, and with each step, the weight of their shared history seemed to shift, not vanish, but redistribute in a way that allowed breathing, space, and even cautious optimism, because after hours of confessions, tears, and tense silences, the world felt both impossibly fragile and remarkably alive. Every rustle of leaves and chirp of distant birds amplifying the delicate fragility of their reconciliation. And as they navigated the winding path that cut through the sun-dappled grass, Malik's hand remained steady in Zara's, a tactile reassurance that words alone could not provide. The simple act of holding on becoming a testament to persistence, to care, to the conscious choice to remain present even when the past loomed like an insistent shadow. And Zara, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his grip, allowed herself to imagine the possibility of a life less haunted by betrayal, each cautious thought a small rebellion against the fear that had gripped her for too long. While around them, their friends moved silently, offering presence without interference, understanding that the most powerful moments of human connection often required observation rather than commentary. And Michelle, standing at a respectful distance, reflected on her own experiences with personal and professional turbulence, recognizing the universal truth in Malik and Zara's struggle, that healing rarely comes with spectacle, that it is crafted in small, deliberate gestures, in the commitment to remain visible and accountable to another human being despite the temptation to retreat into self-preservation. And Toya, her posture steady, observed how the couple navigated the space between them, noticing the subtle shifts in body language, the slight lean toward one another, the tilt of a head, the quiet exhale of shared tension that spoke more than words ever could. And as Malik finally broke the silence, his voice low and deliberate, he spoke of the lessons of the night, the revelation that truth, though painful, carries a liberating weight, and that in choosing honesty, even when it risks immediate discomfort, one lays the foundation for a future that can be both shared and resilient. And Zara, listening, absorbed every word, recognizing the layered honesty in his confessions, understanding that his words were not promises of perfection but of effort, consistency, and presence. And as they continued their measured walk, the path winding toward a small clearing where sunlight pooled like liquid gold, Malik and Zara shared glances that were rich with unspoken agreement, the silent acknowledgement that their journey would be neither swift nor easy, but that together, they could navigate it with dignity, patience, and courage. And behind them, the friends who had remained through the night whispered softly among themselves, marveling at the subtlety and strength of the reconciliation, understanding that the drama of last night had given way to the quiet power of renewed trust, a lesson more profound than any televised spectacle could ever convey. And as they reached the clearing, Malik paused to allow Zara to take in the soft beauty of the space, the way sunlight danced across the grass, how the dew clung to each blade like tiny diamonds, how the distant sound of children playing carried a simple innocence that seemed almost miraculous after the intensity of the night's revelations. And Zara, feeling the serenity around them, allowed herself a small, genuine smile, one that carried no reservations, only the fragile joy of being present. And Malik, noticing the subtle change in her expression, felt an unexpected surge of hope, a quiet affirmation that perhaps the night's pain had not been endured in vain. And as they stood there, hands still clasped, they realized that the morning, like love itself, required careful tending, consistent attention, and the courage to remain vulnerable, even when past scars ached and the shadows of mistakes lingered. And with that recognition, they began to move again, their steps lighter, synchronized, deliberate, as if the rhythm of their walking mirrored the steady beat of hearts determined to persist, while the soft chatter of friends behind them offered gentle commentary and reassurance, their voices underscoring the realization that the work of repairing a fractured bond is both private and communal, a delicate interplay of self-awareness, empathy, and accountability. And K. Michelle, absorbing the scene, reflected that in a world that prizes spectacle over substance, this quiet perseverance was itself extraordinary, a testament to human resilience and the often unseen heroism embedded in the daily acts of love, patience, and fidelity. And as the group continued down the path, Malik and Zara's shared journey became a living metaphor for the broader truth, that while the past cannot be undone, the present is malleable, capable of transformation, and the future, though uncertain, remains theirs to shape together through consistent, conscious choices. And in that realization, the morning sun seemed to shine brighter, the air carried a gentle warmth, and every subtle gesture between the couple echoed with profound significance, a reminder that in the quiet endurance of ordinary moments, extraordinary reconciliation is born. As the sun climbed higher, bathing Malik and Zara in a gentle, golden glow, the story of their night-long journey from confrontation to cautious reconciliation reached a quiet, reflective pause, leaving viewers with a mixture of awe, relief, and unanswerable questions, because the drama they had witnessed was both public and intimate, raw and deliberate, a reminder that human relationships are complex, fragile, and endlessly captivating when tested to their limits. And as you watch this story unfold, it's impossible not to feel the tension that hung in the air, the weight of unsaid words, the tremors of fear, and the glimmers of hope, each moment captured like a heartbeat, like the pulse of lives intertwined, yet not fully healed. And the lingering question remains, will Malik and Zara truly overcome the shadows of the past, or will unseen obstacles challenge the fragile trust they have begun to rebuild? And as they walked through the quiet morning, hands still clasped but minds aware of the work ahead, you are invited to imagine yourself in their shoes, to feel the delicate balancing act of love, honesty, and vulnerability, because the choices they make are universal, echoing through every friendship, family tie, and romantic bond you have ever held dear. And this story, while sensationalized, captures the emotional truth of human resilience, the courage it takes to face mistakes, and the quiet power of forgiveness when paired with consistent action. And as the narrative settles into the minds of those watching, you are challenged to reflect on your own relationships, where patience has been tested, where misunderstandings have festered, where courage could transform tension into connection. And as you ponder these questions, consider the subtle ways Malik and Zara demonstrated the endurance of care, the intentional gestures, the vulnerability that invites healing, all of which demand attention not just in extraordinary circumstances but in everyday life. And while the cameras have stopped rolling and the microphones are silent, the impact of their story lingers, pressing gently against the consciousness of fans who have followed every glance, every pause, every soft-spoken word, because what you witnessed is not just entertainment, it is a mirror, a prompt, a call to recognize the complexity and beauty of human connection. And now, as a viewer, you are an active participant in this ongoing story, invited to weigh in, to reflect, to share your own interpretations, reactions, and experiences, because community, commentary, and conversation are part of the fabric of storytelling, and your voice matters in shaping the narrative beyond what is recorded, beyond what is edited. As fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and discussions have already erupted across social media platforms, debates unfolding about motivations, choices, and the ultimate outcomes for Malik and Zara, while countless others have shared moments of personal resonance, feeling inspired, provoked, or reassured by the couple's willingness to face raw emotion head-on. And as the drama simmers in the minds of the audience, the overarching question of what happens next hangs tantalizingly in the air, because stories of love, betrayal, and reconciliation are never fully complete. They evolve, they challenge, and they mirror the complexity of our own lives. And in this space, you are invited to engage fully, to like if you felt the tension, to subscribe if you want to continue following every twist and turn, to comment with your opinions, insights, or even personal stories that resonate with the themes of courage, forgiveness, and trust. Because your engagement transforms passive watching into active participation, amplifying the shared emotional journey. And just as Malik and Zara's fragile steps toward understanding remind us that healing is deliberate, sustained, and sometimes painstaking, your voice contributes to a dialogue that keeps the story alive, dynamic, and evolving. And by liking, sharing, and commenting, you ensure that the drama does not remain confined to a single screen or a single moment in time, but becomes a living narrative, circulating, inspiring, and connecting viewers across the globe who recognize the familiar stakes of human relationships, the fear of vulnerability, the exhilaration of trust restored, and the beauty of emotional endurance. And as you take these steps, consider the layered lessons embedded within Malik and Zara's journey, that reconciliation requires patience, that forgiveness demands courage, that presence outweighs performance, and that even amidst chaos and uncertainty, deliberate action can transform fractured bonds into something resilient and remarkable. And the story, while uniquely theirs, echoes in every household, every friendship, every relationship where trust has been tested and hope must be carefully nurtured. And now, as the final images of Malik and Zara's tentative smiles linger in your mind, the sun rising behind them, the soft glow of a new day reflecting off their cautious but genuine relief, the message is clear. Love is neither simple nor guaranteed, but it is strengthened by persistence, honesty, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. And so, as a viewer, you are invited to carry this narrative forward, to reflect on its impact, to share, to comment, and to participate, because in doing so, you keep the story alive, you honor the emotional labor displayed, and you become part of a larger dialogue about trust, courage, and the enduring human spirit. And as you hit that like button, subscribe for more unfolding drama, and comment below with your thoughts and opinions. Remember that Malik and Zara's journey is both a spectacle and a lesson, one that challenges us to recognize the fragility and strength within our own hearts, our own relationships, and our own capacity for resilience. And in this shared space of viewers, participants, and storytellers, the drama continues, not just on screen, but in the way it provokes reflection, conversation, and the timeless pursuit of connection, understanding, and the quiet triumph of human courage. And as the final seconds of this video fade, the invitation remains: engage, share, reflect, because the story is far from over, and your voice, your participation, ensures that the journey of Malik and Zara, the tension, the reconciliation, the hope, and the ongoing drama, resonates, inspires, and lives on well beyond this single viewing experience.